Demonic possession is one of the most misunderstood ideas in the paranormal. Most of what we think we know comes from movies, not real cases. Tonight, instead of focusing on a haunted location, we're stepping into the beliefs behind possession. Specifically, what trained exorcists say actually opens the door. Not fear, not faith, but vulnerability. Vulnerability. So tonight's episode is a little different because instead of archiving a place, an actual haunted location, we're going to archive some ideas and what exorcists say about how possession actually works. So I wanted to do this particular episode, although the topic is controversial, to say the least, um, because it is pretty misunderstood. Uh, you know, Most people, mainstream people who aren't like myself, who have uh, a specific interest in the paranormal or who have done paranormal investigations, they only get the information about possessions, demonic possessions, from movies. Okay, so movies exaggerate. Horror movies exaggerate everything. Even movies that have been billed as, or advertised as true stories, a lot of those have been exaggerated. I do have specific movies. That's not what this video is about, so I'm not going to speak of that. But anyway, they are exaggerated, okay? When it comes to demonic possession, there is one movie, although parts were exaggerated. It was based on a true story. That is the movie The Exorcist, the most well-known, movie about possession, I would say. And I would say the first movie that kind of shocked the watchers when they saw it, because at the time, people in the theaters ran out, they threw up, you know, they were basically fearing for their lives. They'd never heard of such a thing, or if they did, that they probably didn't think it was a real occurrence. So the shock factor on the movie The Exorcist was high. Um, a lot of that was exaggerated. People cannot physically spin their heads completely around. That did not happen. um, Parts of that, you know, can happen, and I'll probably touch on a little of that as I go through this episode. Um, but even exorcists, actual exorcists who do this, who help people who believe they are possessed, will tell you that possession is rare. Okay, it is a rare thing that happens. Out of the hundreds of calls that they get, um, maybe one of those would be an actual possession case. Okay, so the goal of this episode for me is to kind of give you some facts that have come from two specific Catholic exorcists who do this. They do it frequently, okay? And you can watch both of these exorcists. Actually, both of them have YouTube channels. I'll link them down below. They are two of the exorcists who are Catholic, who I enjoy the interviews that they've done. They frequently do interviews, especially before Halloween. It's a Halloween thing, folks. They want you to be aware of patterns, okay? They not fear those movies that are exaggerated. They make people afraid. For those that believe it's a possibility, You can walk away from the movie just, you know, being afraid of lots of things. There are patterns that happen. There's a progression of how things happen. I'm going to go over that in this podcast video. Okay. So the reason that I picked these two people to reference is that they have firsthand experience. They are trained Catholic exorcists, and this is what they do. Okay. Um, they're modern, they're not, it's not about a person from a time long ago. These people are live and well and doing exorcisms when they do happen. Okay. When people are actually have a demonic possession, these are these are the people in the front lines. Okay. So they know the truth. They know some causes. They know, what signs to look for. They know the real deal. Both of them are very public, and the reason I love this, the reason I love the fact that there are two Catholic priests not just talking about it, but on YouTube and in, I'm sure on other platforms, whatever, is that growing up as a Catholic myself, it was never talked about. I never heard my parents talking about it, although I don't know why they would. I don't think there'd be a reason for them to talk about it, okay? But it's not mentioned in the Catholic Church. It's always been like hush hush on the down low, I was never aware of this until, oh gosh, I'm trying to think of when. Because The Exorcist, the movie, I don't even know how old I was when I watched the movie. I really don't remember. Um, when I got into the paranormal, I would say that's when you naturally, if you're a paranormal investigator and you're in that community, it's something that you hear about all the time. Now, nowadays, if you watch some of the shows on the paranormal that are on, specifically Ghost Adventures, just saying, you'll see it mentioned, okay? They Ghost Adventures, if they're saying that one of them is being possessed while they're in a location, they are full of shit. That's my opinion. Sorry. From what I have researched, and these particular exorcists here who do this and other exorcists who do it, that is not how it happens. You don't walk into a location and become possessed within a 20-minute time frame, even an hour time frame. Unless it was already the progression was already there, and whatever demon that you had trying to possess you went with you. Okay? It does not work that way. It does not. Okay? And I'm going to talk about that. This is why I wanted to do this video. So, these two exorcists, they are, if you watch them speak about it, which you can if you check out their YouTube channels or any, interviews that they've done, they're very calm. It's not sensationalized like a movie. They don't exaggerate, okay? They'll tell you how it is. So, the first exorcist I want to reference is Father Dan Reehil, okay? He's probably the one I watched the most. One, he's on the younger side. He's in his 50s. I find his story fascinating about how he became a priest to begin with, okay? He grew up as a Catholic, but what happened to him was he was abused by a Catholic priest. Yes, you heard that correctly. He was abused by a Catholic priest when he was, I believe he was like a preteen or teenager, and started avoiding going to church. He did not go to church for, it was at least a year, if not more. I don't remember exactly. He avoided going. He did not want to see that priest, obviously. He made up stories. He must have been an older teen, because I know in one interview he said, his mom would ask him like, "Oh, are you going to church?" And he would say, "Yeah," and then he wouldn't go. So he moved away from the church for that reason, and he worked on Wall Street, of all places. Where he said lots of things go on if you're working on Wall Street. That's a whole nother topic. But for many years, he had that job. He was actually married at one point, okay? Which normally Catholic priests are not married, but at this time he was not a priest. And then he wound up finding his way back to the church and became a priest after that. Okay, he's got a whole he's told his story about that numerous times. It's very fascinating to me. So anyway, I like he's very common sense. He speaks in a way that everybody can understand him. There's no fluff. He tells it like it is. He's very personable. I enjoy listening to him. So to hear Father Dan Reehil when he's talking about possessions, there are a few things, different exorcists. There are always baselines and guidelines, okay? Because they've all been trained. And who trains the Catholic exorcists is, they literally go to Rome, Italy, where the Vatican is, and they are trained in Italy, okay? Every single exorcism, if they're actually going to do an exorcism, they need permission from the church. Now, there is a hierarchy here. So above the priest would be a bishop, okay? I do believe the bishop has the right to okay things, so that they're not constantly going to the Pope, who would be the next, one up that they would have to get permission from. So I believe to make things easier, they go through the bishop. But other things have to occur. The person gets checked out mentally. They see doctors. There's a whole list of things that have to happen before an exorcism even takes place. I will touch on that later. So Father Dan Reehil, he emphasizes that we all have free will, okay? Regardless of what your religion is or your faith, a lot of the religions speak of, we have free will as humans, okay? We are able to make our own choices. The other thing that he will touch on a lot is that nothing happens without consent. Nothing happens without consent, meaning possession does not happen without consent. This one here has always been the biggest thing for me, the thing that always confused me, okay? Because quite of the few possession stories you will hear, like The Exorcist, based on a true story, although the true story, it was a boy and not a girl, number one. But, how would a kid give permission? How would it give how is that even possible? You know, kids aren't doing things, you know. Um how would they give consent? Is a demon like over here like, "Hey, will you give me permission to possess you?" And the kid's going to go, "Sure." It was something that I was like, "What the hell? I don't understand. That makes no sense to me." I will go further into that. Uh, Father Dan also talks about how trauma creates vulnerability. Okay, so demons pretty much they prey on the weak, vulnerable people, more vulnerable, such as in kids, in teenagers. Okay, in children, they are vulnerable. Okay, it's not easy for them. They don't know how to discern between, a demon and a regular spirit. Most adults could not do that, let alone a child or a kid or a teenager. But trauma creates vulnerability and a hole within us. Okay. So it could be childhood trauma of any kind, um, depression, substance abuse, anything that you can think of it in terms of like trying to when you're trying to arm yourself not to get sick, not to get physically sick. Okay. um Being here in Michigan, when fall hits, we're like, oh shit, gotta pop the vitamin C and gotta boost that immune system up so that we don't get attacked by some virus. I don't want the flu, I don't want a cold. There are ways to arm yourself so that that doesn't happen. You can think of this way, okay? Um, Depression, anxiety, fear, compulsiveness, just mental illness, not being, just stress. All of these things can make you vulnerable to being possessed. I'm not saying that if you're stressed out, you're going to be possessed. Not what I'm saying. But it's one of those things, okay? Father Dan also talks about occult practices as doorways, um, which this can be Ouija boards, psychic mediumship, psychic readings, tarot cards, which I personally read tarot cards on my other channel here. I have an opinion about this. That those things open the door. There's also like straight up Satanism where you're summoning things. I kind of put that in its own little category. Most people are not doing that type of thing. Um, the Ouija boards, I think those are the biggest thing. They're the biggest controversy within the paranormal space. Um, but all of those things are kind of they're tools to me. But if you don't know what you're doing, you can find yourself in trouble fast. The thing about the Ouija board is you can't discern if you're getting an answer back. If you ask a question and you get an answer back, you don't know who you're talking to. You don't know who or what that spirit is. The thing about demons is that they know how to play pretend very well. Okay? They will pretend that they are your grandmother, your grandfather, your aunt, anyone passed over that you may think it is, just to hook you in, just to get the person in. They're going to play pretend. Okay? Which is why, me personally, I would not use a Ouija board. I never have. Even though I know how to protect myself, I do it when I do tarot card readings. Before I even start, I say a prayer. I do do connect with my spirit guides and that type of thing. I will pray to angels because I was raised Catholic. But anyway, there are ways to arm yourself. So, but the Ouija board, in my opinion, is a little bit different. Okay. I feel that there's a little bit less control when it comes to the Ouija board. And I myself, I'd rather not. Okay. So, Father Dan will also say that most cases never reach the possession phase. Okay. As I said before, possessions are pretty rare. Okay. Um, so the other exorcist here that I want to discuss is Father Carlos Martins. He does have a YouTube channel. He has a podcast called The Exorcist Files, where he tells about many of the cases he's done, as well as other priests. His little, his viewpoint, or where he bases things from, is there's always the progression. There's always a certain order in how things progress, okay? You have infestation, you have oppression, you have obsession, and then possession. Possession is where you're bordering on that, the ownership of the soul. So these 4 stages, the infestation, the oppression, the obsession, the possession, it's a slow erosion of control that the person has. When I mentioned that if you're watching a ghost hunting show on television and someone's saying that, oh, I'm possessed, that's a bunch of bullshit. It is a slow process, okay? Demons are not going anywhere, okay? They're not in a hurry. This is a slow process, and Father Martins, has mentioned this many times, that there's a process of how it happens. There's a wearing down of the person that takes time. It's not happening overnight. Okay. There's a progression there. Think back to The Exorcist. If you've seen that movie, think about what happened when Reagan was using the Ouija board and the progression of how things started, taking place. It started with like sounds in the house, lights flickering, that type of thing. It wasn't overnight. Okay. That's how those things work. They'll take as long as they need, okay, because to them it's worth it. Now, Father Carlos, one of his things that he'll say is, it still matters, if you're just curious. This one I disagree with. You can be curious, you can watch movies, you can watch videos. I don't think you're gonna become possessed just from watching my video. you know, um, you might eventually be over curious. Maybe you become obsessed with the topic. That might have something to do with it. But he, according to him, that curiosity still matters. Exorcists will always say even things like participating in Halloween, um, watching horror movies. Okay. So they have different viewpoints on what will cause it. But this is because they are in this world. They deal with this. Okay. And they're putting out that message that they don't want this to happen to people, because it's a horrible thing. They want to protect people. So I understand that, okay? Father Carlos Martins will also mention objects and environments. Okay. I'm sure some of you might have heard about haunted objects. There are some movies now dealing with haunted objects, like Annabelle the doll. Um, Annabelle the doll, I think, is one haunted object that I don't want to go near. Okay, just my opinion. I don't want to go near her ever. Okay. Um, so those can play a part if you've got an object in your house, you bought it at a thrift store or someone gave it to you, you don't know the backstory. Um, I wasn't always a huge believer that an object or an environment could play a part. I think my views over the years have changed for various reasons. Um, Personality, how you go through life, that can play a part. The thing about demons is they're very arrogant. They love to mock people. Once it gets to a certain stage, there's a whole shitload of mockery happening. Okay, as I said, they like to pretend. They're like a shapeshifter. They're gonna pretend to be something they're not to reel you in. Okay. So now I'm gonna go over a little bit more over the 4 stages of possession. Okay, it's the progression that Father Carlos Martins talks about often. Okay, I will give an example of one of them as I go along. So the first one is infestation. The first stage. This is influence over a place or an object. There's activity that could be tied to the environment, to the actual environment. In infestation, the person is not affected directly. So, infestation is basically things happening in the environment, okay? Could be lights going on and off, there could be sounds, um, noises, maybe some movement of objects, something falling off, the wall, that kind of thing. The second one is oppression. So, oppression is about the external pressure on a person. Sleep disruption, heaviness as in feelings. There's no loss of control. The person still has um, control of themselves. My personal opinion is that this is the most common stage of possession. I had a paranormal investigation case many years ago. I actually did a video about it here on YouTube. It's called The Military Vet. You can check that out if you want. He was a military vet. He had served many tours of duty. He was drinking heavily. He refused to go to church. I believe that this was the state that he was in. Okay. There was external pressure, but I believe that he had an attachment. I had some experience with that particular attachment. That's what I talk about in that video. It was not a fun experience for me. It was frightening, honestly. So they have sleep disturbances. Okay. There's no loss of control, but at this point, it's more than just the sounds, or lights going on and off in the house, things like that. It's starting to work on your mental status. Okay. If the person is exhibiting toxic traits, so let's say they'll drink more heavily or they will do more drugs, um, because they're being disturbed now. Things for them are they can feel it. They that's the oppression. They can feel that like something's different, something's going on. There's weird things happening around me. It's kind of a confusing state. Um, so things are getting worse for the person, okay? But they still have their faculties, they're still going to work and that kind of thing. Most people probably not would not notice that something's wrong with them because when these stages happen, they're usually pretty subtle, okay? Unless the person's flat out telling you, that something's going on with them, you more than likely would not know. So the third stage is obsession. This is where stuff really starts to go south, okay? The person will have persistent intrusive thoughts, okay? That demon is going to say some shit that's not true. It their mental status is going to start going downhill. This is where the person's really going to know something's not right here. There's some shit going on with me and I'm not liking it, okay? There can be a mental fixation on something in particular, whether it is something toxic. They can become fixated on demonic subjects. They can become fixated on a person. There's different variations of this according to each person. During the obsession phase, the person's free will is weakened, but it's not removed. It would be similar to having a really bad influence in your life, maybe a friend that likes to do things they shouldn't be doing. It's kind of like the demon is like chipping a hole through the wall, wearing the person down. This is really a huge wearing down phase. Okay. That third phase, that obsession, sorry. It's the demon's kind of like, I got you now. You're pretty much there. Hook, line, and sinker. I'm almost done with this. It's really getting much worse at this point. They still have free will though, but it's hard for the person to use that free will because they are worn down. Okay. Let me take a drink here before I mention number 4. So the fourth and final stage is, of course, possession. This is rare. Okay, I'm going to state that again. It's rare. With possession, you get loss of bodily control. Your soul is not possessed, but the demon is pretty much with you most of the time, and you're going to go in and out of that, acting mainly like yourself, to the demon kind of taking over of your body, taking over your body. So as I said before, with those rare cases where it is possession, the medical causes are ruled out first, okay? These Catholic exorcists, there is a procedure for this. They get hundreds, if not thousands, of emails, okay, from people saying, "Hey, I think I'm possessed." And then, so there's a process. They have to go weed through all of them, all has to be weeded out. When they do have an inkling that someone may be possessed, now they have little kind of sneaky ways of going about this. Sometimes they'll say, "Hey, come in, meet with me." They'll plan a meeting with somebody, and they will have holy water sitting in their office, or their space, or they'll take it with them if they're not meeting in their space. But um, I believe it was Father Dan Reehil. Uh, maybe not. Maybe it was Father Martin. Anyhow, they were speaking with someone who was saying, like, I'm possessed, etc. And because this is so tricky to discern, um, they have different ways of doing this. Like I said, there's sneaky ways. Okay. Holy water, which is blessed water, it's been blessed by priest. And I'm sure you're aware of it if you've seen the movie The Exorcist or any other possession movie where they've used it. It will get an immediate reaction from the demon possessing the person. So they will frequently, disguise this when they meet with someone. They will. I've heard them say that just a simple flick. One of them flicked it on someone's neck. And if they get an immediate reaction, that's a really good clue, really good way to know that person is possessed. Just that. Only that. Flicking holy water on the person. Because if somebody's not possessed, they're not going to have a reaction. It's going to be like flicking regular water on them. That's not the case with possession, okay? Sometimes they will take oil that's been anointed. Same concept, only it's oil. They'll rub some on their hand, they'll shake someone's hand, same thing. If there's something going on, the person is going to have a negative reaction to that oil, okay? So they have to rule out certain things before they go ahead and say, like, oh, I believe this person is possessed. They have a list of things, okay? One of those things is they have to rule out medical causes. The person needs a physical exam as well as an exam from a psychiatrist. In the Catholic Church, those exams and the psychological exams from psychiatrists, I believe it was Father Dan Reehil said that they cost sometimes $2,000 to $3,000. The Catholic Church foots the bill for those exams because they are going to make sure that this person, they want to make sure that there's no, mental illness going on or some other physical, reason for their symptoms, okay? Like seizures, they want to rule all of that stuff out. They have to do it in a certain way in order to get permission from the bishop or the Vatican to say, yeah, I need, this person needs an exorcism. They're going to say, okay, have they had their exams? Did they see a psychiatrist? Did they see a, doctor? Are they physically, all that. Okay. So now I want to move on to a particular movie, and I want to use this as a modern type of example. Okay. There's a movie that came out a few years ago. I believe it was 2023, called Nefarious. Such a good movie. Okay. It's not a documentary. Okay. I don't want to say too much because if you want to watch the movie, I don't want to spoil it. But I do believe both of these exorcists have mentioned this movie. Um, Father Carlos Martins, I know he did. I can't remember if Father Dan Reehil has. The movie Nefarious, according to at least Father Martins, is more of how possession happens. It's a realistic view of how it happens. Okay? In contrast to, the movies that exaggerate everything, and you got the Exorcist where she's like spitting out, green stuff and that type of thing. Although, as I said, weird thing they will do weird things, but you know. So the movie Nefarious, it takes place in a prison. The two actors in this movie are phenomenal. There's no special effects. I've watched it a couple different times. There's no special effects. It's not chaotic. It's very different. Okay. I'm trying to explain it without giving it away. I don't want to spoil it. But it shows how possession is about psychological manipulation. Okay? It shows how the demons use people's feelings and mental status, their emotions. It shows how they do things in a kind of methodical fashion. All right. Now, their goal is to gain control of the person. As I said before, they'll take all the time in the world to do this. They don't care. They don't care. The way that they gain the control, it's a slow and methodical process that I said before does not happen overnight, all right? The movie Nefarious shows how this happens, and it shows it without Hollywood special effects. They actually did have a Catholic priest who was there when they filmed the movie he was a consultant, okay? But there's no spectacle going on. This is all kind of an internal battle. It's like spiritual warfare. It also shows how the person is not really aware of what's going on. Okay? So when I said before that the person must give consent, it's done in a way, it's not like the person's like, hey, I'm going to sign this consent form, okay? Where I mentioned before how I never understood how children were giving consent to be possessed, or even teenagers. It's because the demon is tricky. The demon is a trickster. They are out pretty much to destroy us, okay? You end up giving consent in a way that you don't even know that you're giving consent. You could be asked a question by the demon that you probably don't even know is a demon. You're going to give a particular answer. There you go. Bingo. Consent done. That's all I need. That's what that's what they're going to do. So, but this movie it's really good. Okay. I'm going to tell you again, it's a really good movie. It's not a flashy Hollywood movie, but it's a really good movie. And it shows a clear example of how someone becomes possessed. So I am going to agree with, I believe both of them said it, but at least I know Father Martins said it because I believe he was asked in an interview, what he thought of the movie, and he said it's pretty much spot on portrayal of how demonic possession happens. The real portrayal, not the Hollywood version. Those are two different things. The Hollywood version is a little bit of truth sprinkled with a lot of, special effects to get people, to watch the movie. So even in other religions, belief systems, um, as I said, we all have free will. Okay. Um, the permission isn't always intentional. In my opinion, and I would say most of the time, it's not intentional because there's trickery going on. Okay. There's trickery going on. So person's not going to really, it's not like they know that they're giving consent. So that was a good thing for me to know when it came to like children, and because I couldn't figure out for the life of me for many years, like, I was a kid giving consent. That makes no sense. Now that, if you understand that it's not always intentional, it's easier to understand that. So let me take another drink here. So as far as like paranormal investigating and exorcist, things can overlap there. As a paranormal investigator, when you're going to someone's house or a location, you may run into things that where you're going, hey, this is not your typical run of the mill, someone, some spirit wants to say hello kind of thing. There's something more going on. Like the investigation I did with the military vet. Okay. It happens. There are specific investigators who end up specializing in demonology. Okay. Ed Warren of Ed and Lorraine Warren, of the famous, Annabelle and Conjuring movies. He was a self-proclaimed demonologist. Some people end up specializing in investigations that are more involved, that may be demonic. Okay. I do think it's a good thing if the person knows what they're doing, if they're not full of BS just saying that's what they do. If they're truthful and they really know their stuff. Okay. Because they can help, run of the mill paranormal investigators understand more of what's going on. Just like when I had the investigation with the military vet, I ended up calling John Zaffis, Ed Warren's nephew, because that's what he does. And I needed some help. I needed to run everything by him. I had to say, like, hey, are we over our heads? Because we felt like we were over our heads. And he gave me a lot of good information. And I believe in him, and I trusted what he told me. So anyway, there are patterns that you will see, when you're doing investigations. If this is something that you do or you're interested in starting doing paranormal investigations, knowledge is key. Okay. There are things that you can watch for, like possessions. Okay. There are also signs that the exorcists use. I think there's 4 signs of actual possession as well that are more detailed, like the person knows not spiritual, the person will have supernatural knowledge about events, which is why they'll, bring up some knowledge of something about you that nobody should know. They do tap mostly into your memories, though. And they will use the memories against you. They will bring up things that, you know, maybe the person hasn't thought about for many, many years. Things that would be considered sins in the Catholic faith. But that's why exorcists, Catholic exorcists, they are cleansing themselves regularly. I mean, spiritually cleansing themselves, so that when they go to do an exorcism, that demon cannot come back at them, okay? Because they're going to get in there, they're going to try to get in their head, just like they did with the person that was possessed, okay? But there's different things that specific things that they look for. The person speaking in, most people would say tongues, but it could even be a different language. If the person doesn't know Chinese and all of a sudden they're speaking fluent Chinese, there's something going on. That's not normal, okay? Things like that, okay? Specific. So when you're doing investigations, if it's something you're interested in, it's helpful to have the knowledge of what you may run into when you're dealing with people doing investigations. There's different, the things that are most helpful for your run of the mill investigator would be knowing, the infestation, um, the obsession, all the, the four different stages. That's helpful. Okay. So, the thing to remember is that this is a process. Doesn't, possession doesn't happen overnight. Um, if you're someone that's, sometimes people can be obsessed with the fear over being possessed. That's not good either. And that can actually, make you more vulnerable to being possessed. There is, of course, debate over, if you're a believer versus a non-believer. Can you get possessed as a non-believer versus if you are a believer? Okay. That one, the exorcists who do this, they probably know more about that. I believe one of them may have said at one point, you won't be possessed if you're not a believer. I think that can be true when it comes to like paranormal things happening. If you don't believe it's possible, if you don't believe in ghosts or, things of that nature, I don't think it's that you're not going to experience it, but if you do, you you might not even notice. You might just be you might be completely unaware or brush it off because you don't believe in it to begin with. So I think there can be some kind of fine little lines there, that are blurred when it comes to belief versus non-belief. But as I said, I did want to do this to go over, different facts according to exorcists who actually do this. I have inserted my opinion because I usually do that. But there's a lot of fear about it because of Hollywood. Okay. I will say now, in the day and age of where we are as a society, we're getting further away from connection with other humans. Okay. All the technology we have, especially when it comes to children, many of them are latchkey kids, meaning both their parents work. They're going to go home, they're going to open the door by themselves, they're going to be alone for a couple hours. I'm not saying that will cause some kid to be possessed, but what I'm saying is, what the hell am I trying to say? What I'm saying is, I think the more we lose social connection with, our family, friends, like I said, especially kids and teenagers, if they're not really connected or feel kind of nurtured, um, I think that could lead them to be more vulnerable when it comes to all different types of things, not just, possession, because that's rare. That's probably the last thing that'll happen when it comes to in the grand scheme of things. Um, but it does create a disconnect. And when you're a kid, a lot of times you feel responsible for everything, you know? So it might make a kid lonely. They may go, "Oh, gee, well, I mean, maybe the kid doesn't have really a lot of friends or whatever." So I think it can just open doors, that disconnect, not just for kids, but for humans. And when that happens, we become more vulnerable to demons, not just demons, because this, like as I said, possession is rare, but oppression and obsession, I think that's common. With all the things in the world today, the state of the world, um, I do think that's common, but most people would not know that that's happening. Okay. Having a healthy mind is good, having a healthy body. Um, if you are someone of faith, or you're religious, arm yourself. Do I think spiritual warfare is real? Yes. I believe I talked about this in my previous video, um, about the crazy things that happened during the Passion of the Christ filming. Yes, I think it's real. So it doesn't hurt to have knowledge. Okay. When I read tarot cards, I'm not afraid. I always say a prayer first, as I mentioned earlier. I think it's not something that I fear. I don't walk around going, "Oh my God, am I going to be possessed today?" That's, you know, because I know that's not how it works. There is that progression. You have time. If you like, oh, there's an infestation, or oh, it's feeling oppressed, or because of those 4 different steps, the person has time to rectify what's happening. One of the first things, the priests do is the exorcists do is recommend things to them. Okay. Um, are you religious? Get in the church, say a prayer. They give them certain things that they recommend, because it's not just about the exorcist doing their job. There's a teamwork thing that's going on. And that's the thing that I don't really think they show in the movies about this topic. You're not going to see, you're not going to see that. So anyhow, there's a whole process. You can, um, you know, click on the links below I have for them to check out, what they say about it. Excuse me. So I don't think that the real question is what causes possession. Like, we know, we have an idea of what causes that from the exorcists who do this, who do exorcisms. I don't think the real question is what causes possession, but why are some people more vulnerable than others? And, once we know that, then we can work on not being vulnerable. Or if we know somebody who we feel is more vulnerable, then we can do things to help them out. So anyhow, hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Let me know in the comments down below. Please subscribe and like the video if you gain something from it. I appreciate all of you. And until next time, keep those candles lit and your curiosity alive. Thanks.